So I feel like I should be harvesting everything from my popped blisters, and that's got to be saleable for profit, right? Anyway, should we get into some proper follow-up?
Okay. So in the wonderful world of follow-up, we have a wonderful comment, as always, from Gareth on Reddit. So we sort of mentioned, I think largely in passing, about like Vanquish being allowed into the fight without an active weapon, and Gareth has basically explained that there are, while there are rules around this kind of thing, the event organizer has just final say on these things and can use their own opinions, thoughts, and discretion to decide what's going on. I think it was sort of like the examples he gave are sort of like if you've shown that you've made every reasonable effort to get the robot repaired to the best of your ability, they might still let you in. So I think in this case, they were hoping for a reasonably good fight between Vanquish and whoever it was they were fighting at the time. I forget now. Shredderator, was it?
Captain Shredderator.
Yep, nailed it. And I agree with their decision that potentially interesting fight. So they let them in without an active weapon, and I think that's somewhat reasonable. Gareth gave another example in his comment about like a situation he's been in where he's had his robot with the power lights on there that he couldn't get them repaired in time because they were quite deep down in the robot, and he had a bunch of other stuff to repair first. And sort of just explaining that situation to the event organizer and was allowed to fight anyway. So these things happen. The rules are not written in stone, it would seem. I don't know how I feel about this. I think I have mixed feelings. I think some rules are more bendable than others for me, I guess. But yeah, I think it just depends on the event organizer and what they reckon. And I think as long as everyone's being safe, I think it's fine. And as long as the rules aren't bent to the point of being a stupid competition. So balance in all things.
Now I think about it, I think the only reason that we even mention the whole active weapon thing as regularly as we do is because of that one incident with Sabretooth in Robot Wars, where we were told, by the narrative of the show, that they would not be allowed to continue if their weapon wasn't working. Even though every other case we saw in Robot Wars where a robot didn't have its weapon working, that wasn't mentioned at all. So I'm wondering if rather than all those times where what we thought was a rule wasn't applied being the inconsistency, the point of inconsistency was actually them claiming that was a rule in the first place.
Yeah, maybe.
It is kind of backed up by the whole Series 7 controversy with Storm 2 and can we disallow them for not using their weapon in a fight, but that is such an outlying case of obviously stupid stuff happening that I think we have to just discount that.
I think the only other thing I want to make clear, I feel like I've done a bad job of summarising Gareth's comment. So just the other thing is, like, you still need to pass like all the checks and follow all the rules when you first enter the competition. Like, they're not going to let you in at all if you've got a robot that isn't safe and meets all of their rules. It's only sort of like once you're in the competition and you've taken damage as a result of the fights where they might allow you in slightly less than what they would have done at the beginning. But it's just just want to make that clear.
Of course, as always, we'll link to the comment in the show notes so people can read it in full. It's well worth going through.
Yes, go read it. And
I think that's the only point in today's podcast where we're going to be nice about the rules. I don't like to foreshadow too much, but everyone knows where this is going today. Everyone knows.
I don't know what you're on about.
Well, we'll wait until we get there, because I don't even know your feelings on the matter, so I look forward to that.
Yeah, it'd be good.
We'll do the bit of the episode that I am looking forward to first, because not only is there a great intro in this, but either Chris or Kenny, I can't remember which, has used the greatest phrase in the history of the world. The selection committee have doubled down. I can't remember what they doubled down on. I didn't care. I just love that phrase so much. I was pleased to hear it. More importantly, though, can I just say how much I loved the intro to this episode?
You can.
In fact, are you even watching the intros? Or are you skipping through?
I watched the intros. I'm aware of what this intro is. I was enjoying it right up until the point it became a MasterCard advert. But before that, it was great.
Pop culture references, they make the show run, I think, obviously, we, as people who are into this enough to make podcasts, already know how expensive this sport is. But I really like that they took the time to highlight that for the more casual fans, especially now we're getting towards the end of this, where people's opinions are going to be at the most heated about all the robots. I think it's a really good time to give this little reminder of how much commitment, if only in financial terms, teams make to being here and competing. Regardless of how well they perform, I think that's something that people always need reminding of. And if you have to do that in money terms so it speaks to everyone, then fair play.
I think this makes a better conversations with section than the actual conversations with sections in Robot Wars.
I mean, most things would. It's funny how I think, again, we've maybe already spoken enough about transatlantic differences, let's say, but I feel like in Robot Wars they would never mention the money. They would never allow that to happen.
Well, I mean, there were definitely robots where a big deal was made about the fact that they cost, what was it, like 101 somethings to make, and then Chaos 2 costing about 250 quid. Like, they do mention the money when it's not a lot of money.
Oh yeah, and of course when it's rapid, yeah.
Yeah. So it does come up
Well, that immediately shoots my argument down.
It does come up quite a lot, I think, on the BBC, I'm afraid. I think this marks the first occasion where I have out-trivia'd you on something in Robot Wars. Even if on a minor thing.
Yeah.
So, mark this occasion.
Yeah, that 101 somethings was really, really showing off some knowledge.
Look, I shot your argument down with Robot Wars trivia, and that's the highlight of my week.
You should genuinely be proud of yourself because, yeah, you've completely thrown me now, and I'm just going to try and claw my way back any way I can. So thank you for giving me this delaying tactic while I do that.
Going to double down anyway.
Now, I think one thing that Robot Wars never liked mentioning was the fact that this money then essentially goes down the drain. So they're talking about Rapid costing however many thousands while it's shiny and new, didn't bring it up while it was on fire against Carbide. They also didn't mention the fact that, for example, in untelevised endings to fights, the House robots did thousands of pounds worth of damage to some competitors that didn't even make the TV.
Just for fun.
Just for the live studio audience. That's their exclusive content.
Indeed.
Yeah, that's enough attacking the BBC. You know, they haven't really got any skin in the game anymore, so I feel like they're fair game. Shall we move on then to... I mean, I'd rather just go on to Gemini versus some horsemen, but I suppose we should do Ice Wave Huge.
I think we should cover it. However upsetting it is to discuss this quickly, I think we should go into it. I want to point out one thing, which is a bugbear of mine about Huge, and I think that their lack of traction played a big part in them losing this fight.
Yeah, absolutely. They were outdriven quite easily.
Yes, I think they would have been outdriven anyway, but I think they would have been outdriven less easily had they had rubber on the wheels. So yeah, I'm going to keep making that point. I know that there's like weight considerations as to why they don't do it, but worth it maybe.
Perhaps. I think coming into this fight, we could all find a lot of ways that theoretically Huge might win it. You know, we could look at how easily they could get above the bar and get hit on the engine. We could look at the ways in which their wheels might break the Ice Wave's bar. We could look at all of those things, but this really was a lamb to the slaughter. This was the worst possible matchup for Huge.
Do you think that Huge would have fared any better if it had the kind of solid wheels that Gabriel does? Because I'm sort of thinking the closest we have to this is obviously Carbide and Gabriel. And Carbide didn't manage to shatter those wheels. And I'm sort of like, you know, is it just that there's a lot more energy in Ice Wave, which I suspect is part of it? And is it, you know, how much of this would they have been able to deal with had they had solid wheels? Which again, I know weight considerations and stuff, but just assuming they could do it, how much difference do you reckon that would have made?
We'll get on to weight in a second. I absolutely think solid wheels would have given them a much better chance, because it seems that first hit was a case of Ice Wave getting around the side. And bear in mind, their bar's spinning clockwise. They've got Huge on their right. That means that when their bar comes around, it's going to catch the sort of inside edge of the wheel first, if that makes sense. So imagine the wheel as in spokes and tyres. It's caught the tyre section, as it were, from inside out, which is a really easy direction to damage it in. It can't really flex out of that. It's going to immediately remove that section. I do really think that solid wheels would have given them a much better chance there, because there wouldn't have been that easy bite. And you talk about weight, but what they've done very sensibly is put on a shorter bar. Now, I'm guessing that bar was also wider and therefore roughly equivalent in weight. I really think it might have been worth their while making that bar shorter and lighter, Yes, less energy. I mean, it's probably lower energy anyway because it's lower moment of inertia by being shorter, but roll with this. Smaller bar, lighter bar, lower energy, fine, accept that, use that extra weight on the wheels. Because the one thing that they're always going to struggle against, and this has been the case with the lighter weight versions as well, is big horizontal spinners. Not only are they taking damage to the wheels, but it's very easy for them to get sideswiped on the bar and get split in half. This isn't the first time that's happened. That's why the moment we heard a robot was getting split in half, we assumed it was huge. Whereas if you have big solid wheels, they almost act as a shield to try and stop that from happening. And the only reason that they've been sort of in range to get split in half is the fact that one of the wheels was broken. If they manage to keep those wheels solid and stable for long enough, they're going to get in, as they planned, straight over that bar and do big damage to the engine, probably take out the weapon entirely, probably win the fight.
Yeah, I mean, given that they've got that shorter bar, it almost seems like specifically designed for the purpose of fighting Icewave, and given that Icewave hasn't got a lot of armor up top around that engine, it's sort of like, you could definitely, I reckon you could get away with a lighter bar for the purpose of having a more solid wheel. And because they've got I say so little, I don't know how much armor they've got, but less armor than they do down the bottom, I reckon it wouldn't take a lot to start doing some pretty significant damage to that engine.
I mean, I would imagine that this is just their sort of anti-horizontal setup in general. Because they've had the experience with the lighter versions of, struggling against horizontals, it makes most sense to just try and get the weapon up out of the way. So, if they were to go up against Tombstone, I'm sure they'd want to run this bar as well, in the hope of getting some hits on the frame. Or even on the chain, those sort of areas.
Huge versus Tombstone would be so funny.
I think we need Huge versus Tombstone versus Nuts too. Just get them all involved. And just watch Tombstone get completely messed up in the process.
I reckon you do Huge versus Gabriel.
I'm not sure there'd be any contact in that match.
That would be like a shockingly dull fight now that I think about it, wouldn't it?
That's the kind of fight that would get set up as a main event and aired as a Science Channel exclusive.
Yeah, I think you're right.
It's the Battle of the Clones. Oh, they can't touch each other. But yeah, I feel like this was their proposed solution for a horizontal. I think it was halfway there.
So living on a prayer.
If anything, you almost wonder if they'd have been better off just sticking with the long bar and hoping they got a better contact. I suppose we should take a second to stop talking about how screwed Huge were in this fight and talk for a second about how well Icewave did do in this fight. Assuming you think they did well. Maybe it's just me.
Well, yeah, but I don't know. It's sort of like I thought they were going to win, and then they won. So it's like I don't think this was a. I think that the lose condition for Icewave was a very unlucky hit to their engine, and if that didn't happen, then it's like, well, they're going to win. So I don't think it was a. I think it was a bit of like a. I think there was probably some chance involved in this fight, but I don't think it was. I wouldn't describe it as a hard fight for Icewave. So it's hard to say. What are you seeing about what they did particularly well? I mean, they did the sensible things. They got around the side. They drove it well, but they always do.
Yeah, just the patience on the driving.
Yeah, but they're always quite. I wouldn't describe the people who drive Icewave as bad drivers. So I don't know. Yes, they did well, but I wouldn't have highlighted it as something exceptional.
I think the patience was really key to this. It would have been very easy for them to just try and fly in for one big hit at the beginning, knowing they'd probably do some good damage. But instead, they let Huge get out. They let Huge kind of fumble around with its lack of grip. They picked their spot. They picked it well. And even then, they didn't just fly in for more. They still tried to pick the right spots to hit. They stayed attacking that one wheel. They got that wheel completely down. And then they knew that they could go in for the proper kill shot. I thought that was very good driving. Maybe I'm giving them too much credit, but I think it's worth noting because, let's face it, with the controversy of this episode, Icewave in general has been kind of overlooked. It's the second time they split a robot in half this season. And we're not really talking about it very much because we're talking about other stuff. So I feel the need to push to get that recognised. At least within what we're doing here.
Yeah, well done, Icewave. I don't think you're wrong to point it out. It didn't stand out to me as all, but yes, I agree. They are good drivers and good tactics in this fight.
Shall we bounce along then to Gemini versus an indeterminate number of horsemen?
Yes, Gemini versus some horsemen. The name of 4 horsemen is still ridiculous. I'm going to point it out every time. It's ridiculous. Why are they called that? It's just ridiculous. But that aside...
I mean, Did they not know the weight limit? Did they build 4 thinking they could use them and just go, oh no, it's in pounds?
We're going to have exactly this conversation every time they fight.
Did they just do like a rough conversion between pounds and kilos? So, it's about that.
Oh dear. Do you reckon they're like maybe like £1 over or something?
Oh, God. Although surely in the time they were there, they'd be able to shave that off from somewhere.
You'd think so. Maybe they try to take the weight out of pestilence, but not war.
They took all that heavy reliability out.
Yeah. Uses up a lot of their allowance, that. It can only have 1 reliable robot, not 2.
This fight did highlight something very weird about the weight distribution on the robots. Because apparently, just having one of the spinners in still kept them in. Now, I really should have checked this beforehand, but I think the BattleBots rules are... Is it 55 or 60% has to be out? It's something like that, but either way, that's quite a big difference in weight between the machines. You know, for each spinner to be 41 or more % of the weight. That is quite significant. So I'm kind of wondering if it is actually that way round, or if they just went, this fight doesn't matter, let it carry on.
That's like an overwhelming sort of, or overruling feeling for all of these fights. Is none of these really matter. I don't think this is going to change anything for any of these.
Yeah, they've kind of tried to sell this as every fight has championship implications. Then we get Gemini versus the 4 Horsemen. Scorpios versus Hypershock. Technically, Scorpios had a shot, but not really.
Well, no, it's sort of like, I mean, the only 2 that really mattered were the play-in matches, but like the other 3 didn't, because it's like, well, there's no way they're going to have both Scorpius and Sawblades, and between the 2 of them, they're clearly going to go with Sawblades. And then the other 2, like, I don't know, like, I can't imagine a scenario where this was not the outcome.
Yeah, there's no way they'd allow a bunch of almost identical machines in. That's not a thing they'd do at all. I mean, Ice Wave Huge had genuine implications, if only for seeding. You know, both were probably going to go in, but if Huge wins that, it's kind of hard not to make them a top 5 seed if they're unbeaten.
That's true.
And Ice Wave would have to go as quite a low seed at 2 and 2, or apparently just not be in at all. I was quite excited when I saw this fight on the card, just because you knew it was going to be kind of chaotic. And then Buttercup and Pestilence died so quickly that it wasn't as chaotic as I wanted it to be anymore. And with Gemini just going in with the wedges, you know, correct thing to do tactically, just kind of took the shine off of it for me.
Yeah, there was like a moment of chaos at the beginning when everything was working, but yeah, the chaos dissipated fairly quickly, which was a shame.
I also found it quite interesting that Gemini seemed to struggle more when they only had 1 opponent to deal with than when they had 3. They looked a lot more dominant against 3.
I think it's because so like the Some Horsemen team correctly identified that Gemini often hit themselves. So I guess when they've got 3 opponents to deal with, they're less likely to damage themselves. Whereas when they've got 2 robots trying to deal with 1, they have a tendency to take themselves out, which they did again.
I think it was Ian Watts at the controls of War, the one that was left. And he definitely was using that strategy when it was 1v2. Just parking himself between the 2 of them. And even though they were facing him with their wedges, they still somehow conspire to screw up. It's almost impressively bad driving.
I mean, it's impressive as well, given that they got some amazing, like, synchronized bashing as well. That there was a moment when they both pushed 2 of the horsemen into the screws almost simultaneously. It was a beautiful shot. And then shortly after, they take themselves out by ramming into each other. It's bizarre.
And I think if it weren't for the fact that all the damage was done to themselves, rather than by any of the horsemen, I think the 4 horsemen could have taken this fight on the judges. They kind of have to get aggression because Gemini were mostly going with the wedges. I think their control was better in terms of not attacking each other. Strategy is kind of a toss-up where you go between Gemini using the wedges, which is a good strategy, versus the 4 horsemen doing a good job of baiting them into hitting each other. So if the damage can go in the direction of the 4 horsemen, I really think they get that fight quite easily.
I don't know, man.
I feel like they've also been kind of robbed of credit for the immobility of one of the Gemini twins, just because it was started by its own teammate.
Did the other Gemini thing, like the one that was immobile, did that move after it? Because it got its like wedge thing torn off by its teammate. Did it move at all after that? Or
it did, yeah.
I thought it was completely knocked out by its teammates, so I wouldn't have given any credit to the Four Horsemen for that anyway.
My memory is that it was the wedge and some side armour that was taken out, and then War managed to get a couple of hits on that unguarded wheel that then broke that side of the drive.
Fair enough.
Although, again, the fact it was still moving on one side often seems to be enough, so who's to say it got counted out at all?
That's what mobility means, Ryan. Movement on one side.
Is it translational, though? Is it transitional?
It's all of these things and more.
Mobility. I love that we have a whole new angle to that argument now as well. Mobility has... This has been such a bugbear across both BattleBots and Robot Wars. It amazes me that it hasn't been cleared up by now. It absolutely amazes me. I feel like there are so many simple solutions to this. You know, if a robot isn't moving, shine a spotlight on it. If it can't get out of that spotlight, it's a mobile. Easy, visual, done. No ambiguity for the audience. Also, good for an audience to be able to tell that something's actually being counted out, which live I imagine is quite difficult. It's just so many easy solutions to problems that I'm starting to think they just like having. Because the less clear your rules are, the more you can mess about with them.
I think that's exactly it. I think the less clear the rules are, they can bend and push them a little bit further to get the to weight everything the way they want it to be weighted, which I would hope is just towards being entertaining. But maybe there are some more nefarious things at play here. Who knows?
I think for the most part, it is towards entertainment, and I understand the need for that. With this being a TV show that we want to wait well, and we want to therefore get renewed so we can have more of it. That's understandable. But I do still think that as much as having lots of noise online about things not necessarily being fully fair is still noise and therefore enjoyed by, you know, the marketing people behind all of this, I don't think it's good in the long term. You know, we've alluded to it earlier. There's been really good stuff in this episode, some really good action, but not many people are talking about it because there was controversy instead. And, you know, anything you can have that puts people in two tribes gets a lot more interaction, but is it the stuff we want to be focusing on?
I don't know. All publicity is good publicity. That's the way it works, Ryan.
It's such a dated mantra, though, isn't it?
I mean, I would describe the whole television industry as dated, so I think it fits.
Anyway, we'll park that one for now, or I'll park that one for now. And shall we move on to Scorpios Hypershock?
Let's do it. The most pointless of these fights, I would argue.
Scorpios still had a shot, I think.
I think in the state their robot was in at this point, they didn't have a shot because they couldn't even get their primary weapon working properly. Like the fact that they came with an angle grinder tells me even if they won this and even if the producers wanted it to be in there, I think the strength of schedule bit, which is just code for producer bias, means that they're not going to be, which means they're just not going to be in there. So yeah, I think it was a pointless fight.
I think this was a good and useful fight when it was arranged, just probably not as good and useful by the time it was able to happen. You know, the moment Scorpios loses the saw, it's kind of lost its main appeal. It's now got a tacked on active weapon. And, you know, fair play to them for doing that, because that must have taken a little bit of sort of jiggling around to get to work. It's very ghetto. The fact they've left the handle on the angle grinder I particularly liked.
And it was visibly taped on as well.
Was it fully taped on, or was that just there to help support it?
I hope it was kept on with a bit more than tape, but I just appreciate the fact there was tape there.
Yeah, it was very much, let's get this through one more fight. Although, let's be honest, Scorpios this season has been based far more on being a tanky wedge than it has on being a saw. So even without the original weapon, I think just having that arm as a clamp would be enough for them. I'm almost surprised they didn't just do that and add more armour.
Because they showed that that's quite effective. Just like once they'd lost the angle grinder again, I reckon if you designed it with a bit more with this in mind, the overhead sort of like clampy thing with the very flat bits of metal out in front and stuff, I think that's an amazingly effective design. Obviously, they've got a lot of drive power, and you really sort of saw that in this fight, where this is the only robot that we've seen fight Hypershock that can keep up with Hypershock. So it's also a very quick robot with good drive and stuff. So it almost doesn't need the saw.
Oh, the driving in this fight.
Two fantastic drivers. It was amazing. But yeah, Scorpius is an amazingly effective robot without its weapon, which is quite funny.
I worry it's more effective without its weapon.
I suspect it is.
Yeah, as much as it is a shame to see it reduced to being a wedge, that's kind of what they would want anyway. So, Hypershock is much improved though because it works.
Its spinner was still struggling. I think it got like one good hit at the beginning, and then it got another couple of grazes, which I think would have been good hits had it not been on top of the robot that it was attacking. But I think for a lot of it, its spinner just wasn't spinning up at all. Like what struck me is it almost seems like they've got the power to do the drive or the weapon, but not both. I never, you sort of get the impression
it's a bit early Hypnodisc.
It's sort of like they can be running away or they can be stationary spinning the weapon up, but they never seem to do both at the same time.
I think there was a point early in the season where, because of the amount of bounce they have in the drive, the weapon was hitting the floor occasionally. I don't know if that's still an issue at this point and is part of it, or if it's just, as you say, almost power draw being an issue or what, but it does seem like a very basic thing to not have fixed by this stage. Maybe their concern was more about making it run for 3 minutes, which, to be fair, isn't a bad thing to focus on. But the power we've seen it has when it's running surely is reason enough to make sure it's running.
Well, if it is a power distribution issue, and I doubt it is, that's just what it looked like to me. But assuming it were a power distribution issue, I suspect that's one of those things that's really subtle and hard to fix. Just with obviously subtle to debug, but has obvious implications. But I would guess the fact that they've had this problem with every fight, and obviously a lot of robots they've got the time and the expertise there to make a lot of repairs and rebuild robots. And you saw a couple of clips in other episodes where they sort of show that they've got these big milling machines, which is how Witch Doctor were able to remill their bits of their robot to fit their bigger motors and stuff. So they've got the equipment and the expertise there to do a lot of stuff. So the fact that their robot never seemed to work the way we'd expect either suggests it's working as designed, in which case it's a poor design, or it's a really subtle issue that they just couldn't get to the bottom of, which is unfortunate.
I suppose the sort of intermittent nature of it as well must make it very hard to debug, because there are times where it's obviously spinning up just fine. That first hit they got on Scorpios was incredible.
Yeah.
Full backflip and some after that.
I mean, again, on the assumption that if we just play out this fantasy land where I have identified what the issue is, I don't think I have, but the fantasy land where it is a power distribution issue, you sort of go, that must be hard to debug, because who on earth wants to drive that thing at full speed and spin the weapon up when it's not in the battle box? Like, you don't want to do that.
That's what the test box is for.
Is the test box big enough for them to really get the drive going?
It's probably big enough for them to do some donuts in, which would kind of do the same thing.
Yeah, because if it's the test box that I sort of vaguely remember seeing from Robot Wars and stuff, it's just a little box where they can put it in the middle and then spin the weapon up. It's not necessarily somewhere where they can really test the drive out.
That's fair. I mean, we have seen the test box. It's not massive, but I believe there's often availability of the box itself to go and do those tests.
Who knows? Who knows what the issue is? Again, it's entirely possible that this is working as designed.
If nothing else, as we say, they have got it running reliably for 3 minutes, which, considering where they were at the start of the season, is pretty damn good going. If there's one thing I would not have put money on this season, it was Hypershock having to go to a judge's decision.
Well, they did it.
How do you feel about the decision, by the way?
So this is an interesting point, actually, because I knew coming into this episode, so normally when I watch these things, I don't know anything about what's about to happen. I tend to stay fairly spoiler-free. I don't look at the Reddit too much. But I came into this episode very aware of the fact that there was a controversial judge decision, and that's all I knew. So for every single fight, I was sort of waiting for that decision to happen. And I was sort of thinking, is this the controversial? Because like Scorpius has been involved in controversial judge decisions before, so I thought maybe this is it. And it's like I don't think it matters which way it goes. It's a really tight fight, so there's going to be people who are unhappy about it no matter what happens. Which was just interesting. So I mean, I think the right robot won. To be honest, I think Scorpius did deserve that win, but I do think it was close.
I feel like the right robot won, but not necessarily for the right reasons. Because I think when you go into the scores, I personally think it should go Hypershock's way. It's very difficult to class Scorpios as having been aggressive because they were wedging for most of the fight, and you kind of have to give Hypershock all the damage because they've taken out their opponent's weapon and taken no damage themselves. Strategy, control, doesn't matter where they go after that. So to me, by the scores, I think it's difficult to give this to Scorpios. But the fact that they've had Hypershock immobilised for about 40 seconds at the end of the fight, and have chosen to put on a show by pushing them around, getting them under the hammers and all of that, when they could have just taken the win, that to me makes them completely deserving of the win, whether the scores say so or not.
And I think we're demonstrating very well here why this was a split decision as well.
It's nice to be agreeing with the split decision for once, at least.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it probably should have gone to Hypershock in some respects, but this was completely the right and fair decision, regardless of how it was arrived at. Although again, it does make me wonder if there's a bit of wiggle room in the judging to say, well, this robot is clearly the winner based on how the last minute of the fight went down. Screw the scores.
I mean, if that wiggle room is there and it wasn't used later on, then, you know, people will be unhappy.
Yeah. People are unhappy, Sam. That's the point.
So I really hope that wiggle room isn't there.
Well then, I suppose we better get on to these, what's the term, play-in matches?
Play-in matches, yeah. So 2 guaranteed spots.
It's a terrible phrase.
Yeah, but I think what they're trying to convey is that there's 2 guaranteed spots. So they've got 3 verticals here that they can't decide between because they're identical robots. And then they've got this last chance rumble. So I guess we can start with what do you think of this idea in general, these 2 rumbles at the end for guaranteed spots in the final 16?
I really like the idea, particularly with all the verticals. You know, we aren't shy of mentioning that there are a lot of verticals in the field. They are more similar than they are different in most cases, and that thinning the herd would be good. So I think to be able to take 3 of them that all arguably deserve a place and whittle that down to 1 is a smart idea. I don't think that rumbles are necessarily fair, but I think they're equally unfair on all 3 participants in this case because they are basically the same design. If you had a rumble with, say, some very damaging robots and some very non-damaging robots and then decided that damage was all that mattered, that wouldn't be good. So yeah, in this case, you know, curated, targeted, really good idea. The last chance rumble in itself, I love the idea that they're happy to do a 6 robot rumble, because I know that's something that has kind of gone out of favour with BattleBots, but I think there has to be entry criteria for anything that give you a shot at getting into the tournament. So, you know, Robot Wars did it really well. The 10 robot rumble, everyone had earned a place there through a very well defined and set out process. And therefore, anyone that won it, by at least some arguments, deserved to be there. If you just take applications and just let anyone in, or just pick based on entertainment or whatever, at that point, I think you're on shaky ground. So I'm all for a 6 robot rumble, but let's make it of the robots that you're currently ranking, you know, 16 down to 21.
And maybe require that each robot in there has won at least 1 fight before, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah, just have some kind of entry criteria. Entry criteria that are made clear at the start of the fight for viewers as well. Because I still think that clarity is always good in these situations. People have been left with a lot of unanswered questions, and that's only fueled the fire.
So I think I largely agree with you. I think the one between Endgame, Warhawk and Brutus was a really good idea. I really enjoyed that fight and that premise. Because I think all 3 of those deserve to be in the final 16. I think that makes sense. The last chance rumble, regardless of the entry requirements, I think is a more flawed idea. I don't like the idea that there's just this... I feel like there's 3 slots now that have been taken up by these sort of guaranteed entry things, which is a bit... And, you know, and 2 of those have just sort of been free-for-all type things. I don't know. Like, I think the Desperado tournament, I think that was quite cool because you had to like fight really hard for a guaranteed slot, and I thought that was a really good prize. I think using a rumble between 3 robots that all deserve it and are all hard to pick between, well, Brutus I'm less sure of on that, but you know what I mean? Like having that, I think that was a good premise. But just having this sort of free-for-all just sort of seemed... I don't know, I was less convinced of this idea in general, just because rumbles are so random. It's sort of like, oh, we've got, you know, 16th seed. We don't care about that at all. Let's do the functional equivalent of tossing a coin. And I think that's a bit lame. I think they could have picked a 16th and picked an entertaining one, and they would have been able to duck all this controversy. So, you know.
Damn it! I am partly worried that they've gone, it doesn't matter who we put at 16 because they're fighting Tombstone anyway.
Yeah.
And they're kind of gone, well, it's a guaranteed losing spot. Might as well throw anyone in. And I think that does do a disservice to a lot of teams that have earned a chance to be there. And I should point out that you have to be really careful through all of this. Anytime I talk about a team deserving something, I don't want anyone to think that that's implying that any other team doesn't. I think that's something that a lot of people have struggled with in talking about this whole thing. They're sort of, oh, these people deserved something, so that must mean that no one else does. When actually, what you've got is a huge number of teams that deserve as many fights as possible. And it's just about being clear about how they earn that, which is what they've failed to do. So with that out of the way, shall we try and talk about this Vert Rumble?
Yes, yeah, let's do it. So yeah, we have Endgame versus Warhawk versus Brutus.
There's something I need to point out before we go into this. And I am not by any means the first person to have noticed this. It's just the first time it's come up in a way that I wanted to sort of bring up. And that is the green square. The obviously fake green square with the really obviously fake scuff marks on it. Now here's the thing. I love that they've gone to the effort to fake that. I love that they've sort of tried to give that little bit of consistency to those intros, and they're kind of not doing any team a disservice if they happen to be in the imaginary green square and there's nothing there. However, if you're going to go to that effort, maybe don't put it down over the Coleslaw slot. Coleslaw? It's like coleslaw, but worse. Don't put it over the Coleslaw slot and just make it super obvious that it's fake.
I thought it was perfect. I don't know what you're on about.
Easy fooled.
No, I agree. The fake square was a bit weird, but I don't know. It is what it is. I just want to complain about Endgame quickly. I know they've got a thing with the sunglasses, but it's old and lame, and please stop doing it. That is all. I don't know. I want to see people having like I don't know. It seems like they're taking it too seriously and being a bit like I don't know. I prefer it when teams are sort of smiling and stuff like that at the beginning.
I must admit, I'm struggling to work out if being super serious is like an aesthetic for them or just their reality.
I mean, maybe it is there. Maybe they are taking it dead serious, and you know, and that's fine. But I think it can be. There's a fine line between sort of being comedically serious and being off-putting with it. And I think at this point it's just a little bit off-putting because it's I guess part of it is that it's undeserved to me at this point. Like they haven't won enough fights to sort of be that kind of really serious, kind of aggressive appearance and get away with it. Like Ray can get away with being quite sort of I'm just going to smash everyone. I mean, partly because he's laughing about it, and that's I like that, but also because it's like he's got a robot that consistently wins fights. So it's sort of like I don't know. Anyway, that's just my complaint. I don't like the aesthetic. That's just my personal view, and that it's out there.
How do you feel about Valkyrie having an almost identical aesthetic and demeanour?
It doesn't grate me as much because I don't think they do it as much. It's not like the entire team is all stood there, staring into the lens with their sunglasses on their arms crossed. I don't think. I think there's like one or two of them with the sunglasses in there, or I don't know. It just doesn't grate me as much.
Pretty similar.
For whatever reason, it doesn't bother me when Valkyrie do it. It does bother me when Endgame doing it. I can't tell you why.
I'll tell you the difference for me. The presence of a flag. I don't know why, but I find myself becoming ever more anti-flag in the battle box. I think it started with Bombshell. I never liked the Bombshell flag, and now I'm just broadening that out to anyone with a flag. Especially because it's the wrong flag. New Zealand could have had a better flag, and they don't, and that's sad.
They had the opportunity for a great flag so recently as well.
Although I have just realised that Monsoon do it, and I'm okay with that. Which is weird, because I think the Union flag is one of the worst flags. It's an objectively terrible flag.
I don't think it's a terrible flag, but I think no flags in the battle box, I think is a reasonable rule. But then also, I don't have a problem with people having flags in the battle box, so if they want to have flags, also fine by me.
But no sunglasses.
That's my rule.
No sunglasses or seriousness.
You're indoors playing a ridiculous sport. Cheer up and take the sunglasses off.
Casey Neistat can't go on BattleBots.
No, he can't. What would he do? Fight a giant boosted board or something?
Oh, God. And a drone, obviously. And then get in legal trouble for it. Deservedly so. Onto the fight itself.
Let's do it.
Did the right robot win? I feel like I don't even need to ask you that. Actually, I know what you think already.
I think you know that I think the Warhawk is the deserving robot here. I'm not overly fond of Endgame, and I think Brutus didn't do well enough. I mean, I'd be happy. I'd be kind of happy with any of them, to be honest. But I think, Warhawk, they did well. And I also like the way that Warhawk won. I think they did the tactically correct thing. They did a lot more of the hanging back, just sort of letting the other two beat each other up a bit. And then Endgame lost because it was focusing on the wrong robot. So it's sort of like, it's fine.
Yeah, that's actually my problem with the fight, but that's not a problem with Warhawk, if that makes sense. I think that's just an issue with a three-way rumble like this between three high-damage weapons. It was always going to be two take each other out, one capitalizes. But yeah, I completely agree that Warhawk is the correct winner. I think had they not won, they would have had every right to have felt aggrieved about not being in the 16.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely think that Warhawk capitalised in the right way, though. Like, they let Endgame do a lot of damage to Brutus, and then when they had the opportunity, they went for the bigger threat. They took out Endgame first, and then went for Brutus once they dealt with the only robot left that could do them any damage. Then they went for Brutus. So I think they did it all in the right way. They almost had almost like a perfect play through that rumble. So they did well.
I wonder how this fight would have panned out if Endgame had also decided to be tactical, and Brutus had decided to be tactical as well.
It could have been a very boring start, and it very nearly was, because it took a little while for them all to sort of get going. Because obviously they all want to sort of let their weapons get up to speed, so they all sort of move out of their box and then don't approach anyone, because there's no box rushing in this, because they've all got the same.
That'd be a bold strategy.
All in the same tactic, yeah, very bold strategy.
I think the hit on Warstop actually brought the fight to life. Just because it almost startled everyone into doing something.
It's like, oh, that's it, first blood. Right, let's go.
I should point out as well that Warstop was absolutely fine after that hit. The wedge came off, the wedge mounts came off, and that was it. It was still perfectly able to drive around out of the arena.
I wonder how much it had sort of like slowed down from air resistance by the time it got to the wall.
I'm going to say not a lot. It's quite a dense machine.
That's true, yeah. Well, I'm glad that it survived.
These damn untethered projectile weapons are getting dangerous.
Could this be your strategy? How many mini bots are you allowed? Could you go in with a big spinner and a bunch of mini bots and then just line them up in front of your own robot?
No. Don't have a spinner at all. Have two counter-rotating tyres on the underside of your robot and have I-beam shaped mini bots that drive through a funnel at the back and get pelted out the front.
That would be amazing.
I wonder where that sits within the rules. Is it an active weapon? Is it an untethered projectile? Or is it just a consequence of physics?
I think if you arrange the counter-rotating tyres and sort of maybe give them a few spikes and do it in such a way that the tyres themselves could do damage, it just so happens that your mini-bots happen to get caught in the back of the robot and then fired out at great speed in the front, then, I think you'd be all right. I mean, if I were an event organiser, I'd allow it.
What if the tyres had long axles coming out the top with flails on them? That's an active weapon. That's a great active weapon, isn't it, Tornado? What if there was a cage around the whole thing?
Well, that's it. There we go. Cage, active weapon.
It's a perfect
dispute
crime.
Over.
The perfect crime.
Oh, dear.
See, sometimes these very sad moments can give rise to the best ideas.
Yeah. What is the idea that's going to come out of this last chance rumble, then?
Oh, I have a few.
I'm just going to sit back for a bit. If anyone in the audience, if you just get your watches out, have a quick look at the time. And Ryan, go.
Double the injustice, double the fun. That is my subtitle for this. Duck has been screwed over twice. The last and least egregious screwing over that they've received is the judge's decision, which, by the way, was a completely correct interpretation of the rules they were given. The bigger injustice is the fact that they were in this rumble at all. They should have had a place in the 16. The fights they have lost were against the number 1 seed and the number 2 seed. If strength of schedule means anything at all, in line with what it sounds like it should mean, they would already be in the 16. And I've said this already, and I feel the need to justify it a little, so here's how I would have got them in there. We've just had a rumble for vertical spinners that all deserve to be there to whittle them down to 1. Why not just add Witch Doctor to that? Or add Witch Doctor and potentially take out Brutus if you really have to. Put Witch Doctor in there, 4 verticals, 1 goes through, Duck takes the place of Witch Doctor. I like Witch Doctor, but ultimately their wins were against Ultimo Destructo, which was an interesting machine. Blacksmith, which while very good has had a poor season, and they only beat it via the judges, very easily could have got knocked out on the screws as well. They've beaten Overhaul, who again is 1-3. Its only win was against Chomp, who didn't win a fight all season. And the other loss they've had is against the 7th seed, Fair Play. So already I think they are a robot that you could look at as being kind of on the bubble. And if you're grouping all of the on the bubble verts together, they should be in there. So on that basis alone, Duck should already have been there. It would also give us far better variety in terms of weapons. It would be 1 fewer spinner, 1 more other thing. We've literally only got 2 non-spinners. So putting them in there as well would have done a lot, I think, for the tournament. Even Huge, I think, potentially could have missed out based on strength of schedule. As much as I don't want that to happen, I'm glad it didn't. I think you could also look at Huge as one that you would keep out. Warhead hasn't got in on 3-1. Lots of others could not as well.
I think this sort of really highlights a rather flippant joke I made earlier about strength of the schedule being code for producer bias. But I think this it really feels like it is after this fight, because I agree Duck should have been in without having to go through this last chance rumble. And I mean, we talked about this a lot at the end of last episode about we don't think Witch Doctor should be in the final 16. And I it came to the conclusion at the end, actually they probably will be, just because they're Witch Doctor and for no other reason. And then here they are in the final 16 because they're Witch Doctor. And I do think it's a bit lame. I like Witch Doctor. I like the team. I like the robot. But I don't think they should be in the final 16. And it just really... It's bothersome that they're there and Duck isn't, because I think Duck is more deserving. It would be more interesting as well. Even if they fought Tombstone again, I think that would be interesting, because even though they didn't beat Tombstone the last time, they're still probably one of the most likely robots to do it.
Yeah. And let's face it, there are a lot of designs out there that they will not do well against. They're not honestly a threat for the title, but boy can they make the journey there interesting. And if you take all of that aside at all, it's a really well-made machine that you can guarantee will be ready for its fights. All these big spinners, they're going to suffer fatigue as they go. They're probably burning through parts like no one's business. Duck is not going to give you that problem. Duck is a solid bet for you as a producer. So I'm stunned that they didn't make it. I didn't even consider the possibility of them not making it until I knew there was a problem with the Rumble, and then I knew it was going to be Duck-based.
It's so rubbish. It's so rubbish putting them in this Rumble. I know you said, the judge's decision is valid given the rules, and I agree. Given the rules as they're written, this was the only outcome. But I think Duck doesn't stand a chance. Those rules mean that Duck cannot win almost, unless Duck is the only robot moving. They don't stand a chance. If there's any other robot moving at the end of that thing, Duck haven't won, and I think that's really, really lame. It's so obviously biased towards high-energy weapons, and it's rubbish.
Oh, the whole series is. The whole selection process seems to be.
But this is sort of like the embodiment of that. It's almost like a condensed version of that. Because this Rumble kind of sums up so many of the other problems with BattleBots, which has been really good so far. I've really enjoyed BattleBots. I think it's good. But this is just almost the embodiment of this issue with high energy weapons and how it sort of prevents deserving and interesting robots from winning. And even though Duck probably isn't a contender for the title, it sure as hell has a massive influence who is, Duck might not win it, but they can stop Tombstone from winning it, and that would be interesting. As great as a story it would be to have Tombstone win, 3 times in a row or whatever, in the modern series and stuff, would it be 3 times or 2 times? However many times.
2 times.
Another win. It's just let's get someone else in there. Oh yeah, because they were second last time, was it?
So they were second, then first.
Yeah, second, then first. Yeah.
So I think they'd be they'd definitely be the first modern era back-to-back champions. Well, the first modern era double champions across all the competitions. I'm trying to think. Son of Waiachi is the only one I can think of that might have been a double BattleBots champion. There'll be lots of people out there that are screaming answers immediately at this. I'm just not hot enough on my old BattleBots. But I think Sonowachi is the only one I can think of that might have got back-to-back. Although even then, the rules might have been changed to stop that from happening because they were too dominant. You know, it would be a great story if Tombstone wins again, but you want it to be a hard journey. I personally want to see... Well, there's no individual robot that I want to see win that I think will. I certainly wouldn't be upset with Tombstone doing it. I also wouldn't be upset with Tombstone, say, going out in a semi-final and blowing the whole thing wide open.
But it's sort of like if Duck were in this 16... it could blow the whole thing wide open at a really early stage, which I think would be really interesting. It would complete, because at the moment I'm just assuming Tombstone's going to win, yeah. Whereas if Duck had got through and was 16th seed and fought them, it's like that changes everything. Like the whole tournament changes with that fight. And if Duck win, it's like you throw everything you know out of the window almost, because it's just like anyone can win almost at that point. I know that's probably not actually true, but it feels that way. And I think they've really missed out by not having it. I sort of guess that a lot of it is like they don't want to repeat fights if they can help it. But like,
you know how they could have avoided that? They could have put Duck in the 16 anyway, not as 16 seed.
Put it in like 15 or something. Yeah, they could have done so much more.
Well, no, because then it would get Bronco. That's also a repeat. But
oh, that's true.
14 for example, 13 perhaps, which just happens to be Witch Doctor. Put them against Minotaur. Boy, that would be a hell of a fight.
That would be interesting as well. So many more interesting things.
Yeah. But it's not what they did. And I think the anger about that says a lot about how well respected Duck is as a robot and what people want to see. I don't know, maybe this would affect their certainly their selection decisions another time around.
I would hope so. I mean, there's in the televised thing, the audio sounds weird after the announcement is given. So I'm assuming some audience. I'm assuming the audience has been dubbed somewhat, and then there's like a really awkward shot of the judges looking a bit meek.
Yeah, while being cheered in the audio.
Yeah, cheered in the audio, but looking a bit like we had no choice. So my assumption is that they were being booed quite a lot for that decision.
Word on the street is yes, and it really upsets me that they chose to get rid of that from the audio, because in commentary they've sort of gone, "Ooh, that was a bit of a tough one, wasn't it? But everything's fine." Again, don't run from the controversy. Highlight it, embrace it, talk about it, because all you're doing by hiding it is letting everyone know that you're ashamed of what happened. At least they've kept some of the Duck chanting in, though.
Yeah, that's there.
And I must say, I feel bad for the judges having to make this decision, because I get the feeling they didn't like it either.
No, I mean, their reaction is sort of, you almost sort of imagine them holding up a sign being like, we had no choice. I do really, they've made bad decisions in this series. I don't think this is one of them. I think they're between a rock and a hard place, and it sucked. So yeah, I mean, it's a terrible situation all round, really.
And I think the reason we're in this situation, quite simply, is that Rumbles have never mattered before, or at least haven't mattered for a long time. So you have a set of rules that I think really have been written to maximise entertainment, because Rumbles have always been an exhibition. And they've never really had to think about who actually wins and getting a deserving winner. And unfortunately, the way they've gone about it is a bit cack-handed. The judging thing, yeah, fine. Judge robots on the normal judging criteria. But how about we also add another criteria for how long were you moving? Because Bombshell has been able to win this fight without being mobile for, approaching half of it? I think I counted about 80 seconds where they were failing to move outside their circumference. And of course, what happens when a robot stops moving? People stop attacking it. So they've had half the fight of being left alone. And they've been able to sort of walk back in and say, "Oh, lol, I'm alive now," and be part of that judge's decision. Now, I'm not for a second going to say that they did that intentionally, but you know what? Someone could. We all laughed at the whole Michael Oates thing in the 10-way rumble, staying out of it at the beginning and then mopping up. You could do that in reverse here.
I think I don't think they were like doing it intentionally, but like I feel like I read a Reddit thing at some point where it's sort of like they changed drivers in that time.
Yeah.
Where it was sort of like the guy that was driving it couldn't get it to do the kind of movement they wanted it to do. Like I assume they were trying to make it gyro dance. So I think in that time they've got this other guy pushing his way through the audience or whatever, trying to get there to do it, and just manages to get to the control in the last few seconds, which I think is, I don't know, it's just odd to me that it almost is sort of like, well, no one's even on the controls, it would seem, for a bunch of, I mean, I assume they're still there trying, but I don't know. It just seemed particularly odd.
And again, fair play, that isn't the kind of issue you foresee when writing rules. That isn't something they would have ever have sort of planned for. That's all fine. It's just a really simple failing of the rules at all that this was even possible. And yes, they've done good damage at the beginning. Yes, they've been aggressive, they've been controlled. But if you don't take part in half of a fight, you shouldn't be in contention to win. And yeah, this isn't like a football team grabbing a last-minute equaliser where they've been outplayed for most of the game. This is a football team grabbing a last-minute equaliser when they've had a nap for half the second half. And of course, yeah, it's going to be impractical to count every robot out when it stops. But surely, you just let the judges deal with that. We alluded to it earlier. Let them make a decision based on, oh, is there some massive issue that prevents us giving this robot the win? Because, let's face it, no one would have complained. No one would have said, oh, that seems a bit harsh. If that's there in the rules from the beginning, that they can sort of, what's the word, not posthumously, but that's the kind of thing I'm going for, they can, after the event, retroactively count a robot out. That would be, I'm sure there would be no controversy about having that as a rule. If anything, I think that would improve a lot of judges' decisions.
I guess the difficulty there is going to be, what if Bombshell were out for most of the fight, like the middle half of the fight, for example, and then came back at the end and then did damage? What do you do in that situation? Because then they have an influence on the outcome of the fight. So I guess that's why you can't do the after the fact counting out in all cases.
Yeah, I suppose if they come in and knock someone out, can you then bring that person? Yeah, I suppose it gets messier there. I can see that.
But then, you know, when we say, oh, it's impractical to count all them out, I think it's impractical to count them all out with 1 or 2 refs, however many refs they have. Whereas it's like, well, if this is a problem that can be solved with more people, you know? You could get like 12 people to just go and watch all the robots, and then they have a button associated with the robot they're watching, and then when they've gone, they're immobile, you hit the button, and then like the pilot for the robot gets a light come on and goes, you're out, and then they have to put their remote down, and that's it. I think, you know, there are ways around this. They could do countouts in real time if they wanted to.
Yeah, fair play. I can't argue with that at all. I think BattleBots does like the romance of having a physical referee there, but again, just get some more referees in for that.
Yeah, they could have a bunch of referees. Like you could do that, and then you could also have, you know, your I mean, you said like you're having like put a spotlight on them and stuff. Like you could have like these big dramatic projections of countdowns going onto robots going out. You could do so much to make it sort of like visually interesting and a spectacle, and make it really obvious what's going on. So it's like, that robot, they are being counted out right now. Goodbye.
And I suppose it worked in the 10-way Rumble for Robot Wars, didn't it? They had an even simpler system of make the driver step to the back of the box once they're out. Although it did help that you had a pit to just shove them all down, and that was how most of them went out. But
shove them in the pit or in a big pile in the middle.
Of course, another option would be to have some kind of producer-controlled robot in the arena. Could help.
No, that's a ridiculous idea.
Nah, never catch on.
Oh dear.
I suppose the one overriding question that's left is, would we be this angry if it was the other way round?
What do you mean?
Let's have a moment of honesty with ourselves. If Duck had died and come back to life to steal the place off of Bombshell, would we be as angry? I feel like we wouldn't be.
I don't think we'd be as angry. I'd like to think that we'd point out the same obvious flaw in the rules, though.
I hope we would, but I can't guarantee that we would. Or we'd definitely be doing it with a very different tone.
Yeah, and I guess at this point we'll never know.
Yeah, and I think, you know, as much as I am really angry about this, the fact that I have a very clear and well-stated dislike of Bombshell is absolutely a factor.
I so love that out of all the robots that this could have happened between, it's between Duck and Bombshell. It is so perfect. It's just the perfect storm of winding you up, and I love it.
I've been trying not to let that creep in too much, but absolutely. The robot I most love from this series against the one that I despised most last. Although it's a perfect storm for lots of people because it is a robot that has not only failed to win, but failed to even half perform in any other fight.
I'm so bitter that a robot with no wins, and I'm going to count this as not a win, has made it into the final 16. It's ridiculous.
And of course, we can take solace in the fact that Tombstone is probably going to tear them up, but if they win that fight...
Oh my god. You know what I mean?
Abandon Reddit, abandon Facebook, abandon Twitter.
Just abandon the internet.
Yeah, it's not going to be good.
Here be dragons. Oh, man.
Do we want to take a quick look at the bracket as it's coming up? I can send you the link if you don't already have it.
I don't already have it. Send away.
I will warn you, the printout version of the bracket that BattleBots have created has a minor spoiler on it. So I've sent that to you now. I want you to see if you can find the spoiler.
Oh, okay. How big a spoiler is it?
In fact, it's a pretty major spoiler, really. Just give you time to spot it.
I mean, this is just going to be embarrassing.
They've literally told us the winner. They've stated it outright.
Have they?
Yep.
I think you're getting at something like silly here.
Yeah, of course I am. Of course I am. I wouldn't send you a document with an actual spoiler on it, would I? Come on.
Is it the fact that the championship winner box looks kind of like a bar spinner that Tombstone might use?
No, it's the fact that, according to this document, some unknown robot called Who will win. It's right there in plain text, you know.
Robot 56.
Oh, no! I'd like to think that Who is code for huge.
Oh, dear.
Now, the main reason I wanted to get this up is to quickly have a little talk about seedings. Because last season in particular, there was a lot of debate around the seedings and whether they were necessarily representative of the quality of the robots. So looking at this as a 1 to 16, do you think it's a good representation? So Tombstone, Bronco, Bite Force, Minotaur, can't find number 5, I suck. Oh, Sawblaze, Ice Wave, Yeti, Son of Waiachi, Lockjaw, Whiplash, Rotator, Monsoon, Witch Doctor, Huge, Warhawk, Bombshell. Just for people who don't know how numbers work there.
Lockjaw stands out a bit. I would say that's a bit high, and I would say that Warhawk is a bit low.
I think Warhawk had to be 15 because of the play-in.
Which I think is a bit unfair. Which is a bit unfair that it's sort of like, oh, this is a play-in for the 15th seed. Whereas I think if they were just picked without having to go through that process, I would argue they should be a bit higher than 15. And I think, yeah, like I said, Lockjaw I think is a bit high, personally. I think there's a bit of, they're Lockjaw. You know, there's a bit of like strength of schedule stuff going on there. So
I'm a bit confused as to how Son of Waiachi is beneath both Ice Wave and Yeti.
Yeah, that's true as well. They could sort of put them above those two. I think generally, it's okay. I think that kind of makes sense.
I'm pleased to see Sawblaze sort of ranked so high. I think it would have been easy not to do that, and I think that is richly deserved for the manner in which they've won their fights.
Yeah.
And the fact that their only defeat was against Bronco.
Yeah, I think generally they're all right. There's only a couple of little things like that sort of maybe could do with a bit of tweaking, but I think they make sense to me. What about you?
Large, yeah. Apart from the sort of ones in the middle of the pack that I mentioned, I think this is reasonable. I would maybe rank Rotator a little lower when you consider who they lost to. So, they lost quite easily to Petunia. Whereas a robot like Huge, ranked 3 below them, has lost only to Ice Wave. Yes, they lost pretty convincingly, but I think maybe that's something that I would almost swap around, really. I think Witch Doctor might be a little upset to be ranked below them as well, although they're also the robot I said shouldn't potentially be here.
Yeah. Witch Doctor shouldn't be here, so whatever rank they have is wrong.
So yeah, Rotator I'd maybe move down a little, but I must say that when I look at these fights, there's nothing that I look at and go, oh, they might have chosen that particular seeding just to make that fight happen. Maybe Bite Force Huge, maybe, because that's good upset territory, but I think you'd say that no matter which of the top 5 or 6 Huge was up against.
Yeah.
Sawblaze have been screwed over by their matchup against Monsoon, but who knows, maybe they'll pull that off anyway.
I mean, I wouldn't, that could go, that is definitely upset territory, isn't it? I think Sawblaze could get that. I also think Monsoon could get it. I think that's very, that'll be an interesting fight.
For the most part, I can see this whole bracket basically going to seeding. And the only places I see upsets are Yeti Whiplash, Sawblaze Monsoon, and maybe Bite Force Huge, but I think that's wishful thinking. Son of Waiachi Lockjaw, flip of a coin, but probably Son of Waiachi. Very nice matchup against Tombstone there.
Yeah, I look forward to Bombshell being decimated.
I still just fear that they will win that.
Yeah, there's a very real fear that that will happen.
You know, all that combat fatigue from Tombstone having to take on decent bots, whereas Bombshell has been able to just fall onto its arse every fight and get away without doing very much.
Snooze through the last fight and then somehow get here.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it didn't even fight half of its final fight in the Rumble. Saving energy. I know what it is. Bombshell's a Pokemon. It was just using rest. So yeah, that is that, I suppose, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that's everything.
Nice to have a lot of controversy again, in a way, but kind of a shame to be doing our final fight night in slightly angry style.
I guess we can do a quick look back on this whole fight night format in general.
Yes, I like that.
I don't have a lot to say about it. I think I've said this a few times. I've really enjoyed it. I've really enjoyed this series of BattleBots so far.
I can't believe how much I've enjoyed this format.
Yeah, I think they've done really well. They've mostly struck a really good balance around how they do the fights. A few questionable moments and stuff, but generally speaking, this has been really good.
I think the only thing I'd say as a downside is that we have had some really underwhelming main events. And
Yeah.
I don't know if it's luck or judgment that they ended up being kind of in the middle of the season. I feel like that's probably just as they were shot.
Yeah.
I think something I would like to see next season is slightly less of a reliance on top 4 or 5 bots for main events. I'd like to see more main events that are Rumbles, for example. You know, just get 3 mid to lower tier robots in, throw them together and see if it's a good fight. It's also a chance to showcase the lesser known machines. You know, everyone knows that Tombstone is a good robot. No one needs to be told that by a show full of snippets about the robot. Whereas, actually, I'd love to know a bit more about Mecha Rampage. I'd love to know a bit more about Kraken and how that works. And I think giving them a main event is a way of doing that.
Yeah. I think the other thing that your suggestion of doing like Rumbles as main events, I think that wouldn't work if you were doing like main events with big names like this, but you could do... I think this would go a long way to encouraging the producers to not bring as many spinners into the competition, because I think Rumbles between various weapon types, like if you had like flippers and hammers and saws and crushers and God knows what else, mini-bot firing guns, I mean, you know, that would be more interesting with the Rumble format, whereas assuming you have sane rules for it anyway, whereas, you know, Rumbles between three or 4 spinners, as we sort of touched on, is a bit of a toss of the coin, really. So you know, I think they could make the sort of ostensibly less interesting or exciting robots have much more exciting like televised fights by sort of changing the format. And you know, they've demonstrated that they can change the format and have a lot of success with it. So I hope they try a few more things next time.
And again, if you want to have something like a USA versus the rest of the world, there's no reason why that can't also count towards the championship. You know, obviously that worked how it did because of when it was shot. You know, that's the kind of thing that you can do as part of the pre-season and then shoot a load of Rumbles or something with the robots that didn't make it to the final 16, air those whenever you want.
Yeah. I think overall with this, I'm really glad that they've managed to demonstrate that they can make a very successful and, for me, preferable show to the older BattleBots on what I presume to be less money, because they're sort of like a lower budget production, and I think this resulted in a better show. I've enjoyed this more than I enjoyed like the last season of BattleBots that we covered. So it's sort of like, so I'm really pleased that they've demonstrated that they can make a successful show with less money than previously. And
if anything, they've made a better show, largely because it's lower budget.
This happens with a lot of things as well, because there's like often you'll get like these films and stuff that are a lot better than you'd sort of think they would be given the budget, and it's often because they had a lower budget, it forced them to make more creative decisions, because they can't be like, when you put these restrictions on something, it doesn't have to be budgetary restrictions, but I sort of often find if you put any restrictions on something, you'll often get more creative like workarounds to do it, and it will often result in a better thing. So yeah, having less money certainly not hindered them, quite possibly helped them, and you know, it gives me hope that there will be another season, because it's sort of like it's not the overwhelmingly expensive thing. You know, they don't have to do quite as well in the ratings and the ad revenue and all that kind of stuff to make up for this. So I'm hopeful.
The only budgetary issue I see, and the thing that I think is a big difference between this series and the previous 2, is that I know builders haven't got anywhere near the compensation they used to financially, which, considering it's been a much longer filming period, I do worry long term is going to limit, first of all, how much BattleBots we can have, and second of all, what teams can reasonably enter. You know, I'd love that we get some budget builds, and I'd like to see more of that, but budget builds don't work if people can't spend 2 weeks at the competition. So hopefully that's something which, by having had what I think is going to go down as a very successful season in TV terms, not just fan terms, hopefully that's something they can improve upon.
Yeah. The other problem, I guess, with like lower fees, I guess, to the robot builders is that, you know, if you do that, when that happens, in the long term, it becomes it will either become a very low budget thing, or more likely it will become a rich person's game. I think you'll end up with just the people that have a lot of money for building robots, and you'll sort of lose the budget builds, which would be a shame.
As silly as it sounds, by taking the money out of it, you potentially raise the barrier to entry, because we could potentially get to a point where it's basically the only teams that can afford to do BattleBots are the ones with a high enough profile to get picked for Chinese competitions that are going to throw money at them. And that's not something we want.
Yeah, and obviously like the high profile teams that can get all the bigger sponsors and stuff. So,
but that's a problem for the future. For now, we've been able to enjoy a fantastic 17 episodes. And I just really hope that the more competitive environment of the final 16 doesn't kind of take the shine off of that.
Yeah.
I should say as well, looking forward, I really like the way they're doing the final 16, where they're doing the left side of the bracket one episode, the right side of another, and then kind of the semi-finals and final. Really nice way of doing it. And really helpful for us.
Yeah.
They've made the most podcastable series they could, and we appreciate that.
Yeah, this has been much, much easier to cover than the last series of BattleBots we tried to do.
I mean, it didn't help that last series we were doing it after the fact, and I came up with a crazy system that was really pleasing on a spreadsheet. Probably not that easy to follow as a podcast.
Oh dear. Right, I think we're done.
We are done.
You can find the show notes for this episode at spinnerproof.com/episode/39. And there you can find links to all the things we've been talking about today. You can also find a link to our Twitter at Spinnerproof, where you can tweet to us where you would have ranked Duck.
Oh, super serious.
It's a serious matter. So, SpaceX have made some announcements recently. They have finally announced who it is that they're going to be flying around the moon. And but more excitingly than that, they've revealed a bit more information about updates to their BFS, the Big Falcon spaceship.
Can we just take a second to focus on the announcement of who is going around the moon?
Yes.
Who cares?
Well, I mean, it is kind of interesting. So it's a Japanese artist who's like whose name I can't pronounce, but I will put a link into the show notes for you to go and look this up. I listened to him say his name so many times in the hopes that I'd be able to get it and be able to do a reasonable job of pronouncing it. I just can't, and I'm really sorry. But yeah, so he's like a owner of like some fashion brand thing that I've never really heard of, but clearly makes enough money where he can pay some undisclosed sum of money to help fund this ridiculous mission and then get a trip around the moon. He is going with, I think, 8 sort of other people. I don't know a huge amount about those other people, presumably friends / colleagues or whatever. And presumably there will also be like SpaceX employees there as technicians, because there's no way it's going to be just 8 random people on autopilot. That's not going to happen.
That sounds like the start of a really bad sci-fi movie.
Yes.
Well, that's also like half the plot of the Sirens of Titan in a way, so...
What? There's a film that's got like Chris Pratt and...
There's more than one.
One other person whose name escapes me, the female lead, and I feel bad for having forgotten this, but that's basically this, which is like a group of normal people on a spaceship with autopilot. That's really annoying that I've forgotten what that is.
I'm trying to think of the film as well, because it's quite recent, isn't it? To Wikipedia. Passengers.
Passengers, yeah. Who's the female lead?
It's a woman. Oh, Jennifer Lawrence. That does not look like Jennifer Lawrence because it's a film poster. It never looks like the person.
Jennifer, of course, us. It's Jennifer Lawrence, yeah. Yes, but that's basically the start of that film. Is you know they're both normal people. Anyway, so yeah, that's who they've got, who they're flying around the moon.
This is such a SpaceX announcement, though, isn't it? It's sort of, here's a thing that doesn't matter, please remember that we exist.
I think it is interesting who it is in many ways, because it's not. I don't know who I was expecting, but it wasn't this. You know.
I suppose our idea of what a rich person is probably a little bit more narrow than it needs to be, isn't it?
It wasn't even that it was sort of like a rich person. I guess I was sort of expecting someone who was maybe like. I don't want to dismiss how much this person is into space. I'm sure he like cares deeply about it, but like I would have expected someone who was sort of like involved in aerospace as a career. I think is what I was expecting.
How many of those people could afford it, though?
But then, yeah, I guess the people that can afford that are building their own space companies anyway. So it's all like Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos. So, you know, maybe that is a silly assumption. I don't know. But yeah, it's just sort of vaguely interesting to know who has the kind of money that they're willing to just sort of spend on this. But yeah, I mean, it is the less interesting part of this announcement. I think it's sort of vaguely interesting, but I care much more about the changes in the design to the rocket and the spaceship.
Tell us about those. They matter.
So BFS has gone through several revisions. I think the first time we saw it, it was like a 12-meter diameter when they first saw the first kind of ideas for it. It was like a 12-meter diameter thing. It had a mixture of sea level optimized engines and vacuum optimized engines on the spaceship section. And then a bit later on, it was sort of like for ITS, I think it was sort of renamed Interplanetary Transport System, which was announced at some astronomical sort of society big event thing of the year. And it was a much more scaled down thing. I think it had gone down to a 9-meter diameter rocket, slightly fewer. I think it went down from 42 engines to fewer than 42, I guess 30-something, 36 maybe.
You've got to keep it at 42, surely. Just for the bants.
I mean, 42 was great, but it was reduced. I think they still had the idea of the mixed sort of like some on the spaceship section rather than the sort of the booster section. On the spaceship bit of it, there was still going to be a combination of vacuum optimized and sea level optimized engines. And then this is, I think, the third major sort of version of this that we've seen, or the latest sort of thinking on this. And it's changed quite a lot. So it's got these big fins on it now. So it's always had little, like, almost delta wing things, but very small, just on the sort of bottom of it with no tail fin. But they're bigger and more pronounced now, and they sort of, the two bottom ones, if you imagine, are sort of are articulated or actuated. They can move up and down.
Define up and down for me.
So if you imagine the sort of rocket, spaceship, like in the orientation of an aeroplane, right? We've got the nose of the thing at the front where all the people are, and then a long tube going backwards, and then the two fins on the bottom, or like where the bottom of the plane would be, those sort of like wings that would be providing, in quotes, lift. They don't provide lift in this rocket, but like lift if it was an aeroplane. Those things can move, like, because they can move up and down. I don't know how better to explain it than that.
So it's giving pitch control.
It's not pitch, it's changing the angle of the wing with respect to the body of the thing. If you imagine like the tangent off the side being at 90 degrees, by default they're sort of angled down towards the floor, and then it can lift the entire wing all the way up. So it's not like a section of it's articulated. The entire fin can twist around the body, I guess, or tilt around the body.
So it's altering the dihedral angle.
I think I understand what you mean, and yes.
So imagine you've got a paper plane.
Yeah.
You've got your body and you've got your wings. Imagine folding the wings down really hard and really creasing that.
Yeah.
Like that.
Yeah, so yeah, exactly that, yeah. So it can change that angle, which it uses in its descent pattern to change drag and all that kind of stuff. And then it's got like a third fin on top. There's like the tail fin, which Elon in his announcement went to great pains to point out that it doesn't matter. It's not providing anything aerodynamically. It is literally just a landing leg, and it just looks the way it does for symmetry, and that's it. So this...
I was going to ask if any of this was to make it more rockety.
Yeah, I think that genuinely is it. So these I think the fins are aerodynamic, like the bottom ones are aerodynamically useful for re-entry. But they also, all three of these things form the legs themselves. So it lands much more like a cartoon rocket on these fins. It's quite funny. Or that's the idea anyway. And it's also got these two new like articulated canards. I don't know how you pronounce that one on the front of the spaceship there. And the whole thing looks a lot more like the Planet Express ship from Futurama. It's quite weird.
Now that is the kind of analogy I needed.
So that it looks a lot more like that, including the way the engine cluster at the back works. So they've reduced the number of engines. It's 7 engines now, and they're all sea level optimized. So they're all the same size, like the bells. And then it's got this ring around them, which is apparently aft cargo, another 83 meters cubed of cargo that's right next to the engines. Which I presume is sort of where they can put things like rovers and the basic equipment for building a thing, because then it's right next to the floor and not at the top of the rocket with no way of getting it out. So I guess
it's where they're going to store all the ice cream as well.
Yeah, perfect place for it. So yeah, those are sort of like the main sort of like obvious design changes. Elon, I think I watched most of this sort of announcement thing, and there was a bunch of pointless questions from people that know nothing about the cost of it, which Elon kept avoiding. And then one person, like the everyday astronaut, whose name I think is it Tim or something. I
mean, that's all he needs to be. He's just great with that.
Yeah. But the everyday astronaut is the guy's like sort of online presence, and he asked the only sensible question. He pointed out the fact that there are no longer vacuum optimized engines and asked about that. And the bit of information we got is that there's a potential upgrade in the future. They can replace those cargo things and change the arrangement of the engines, and they can still fit like 3 vacuum optimized nozzles for these engines on the rocket, but they're following a similar structure to how they did with the Falcon 9 rocket, where they've got very similar engines between the booster stage and the sort of upper stage.
So is this just a question of, with the launch they're doing for lunar flyby, they don't need the vacuum optimized engines? Is that something they'd be looking at for potentially sort of interplanetary maneuvering?
I don't know. I think that would probably be the kind of thing. I was very surprised to see them gone, because I would think you'd want vacuum optimized engines for interplanetary stuff. So yeah, it might be just a lunar mission only thing to simplify the process for that.
Also, what is the launch profile for this?
How do you mean?
Well, if they've got a lot of sort of atmosphere optimized engines, is this like a normal rocket style ascent, or is this more what we would sort of look at as a space plane style ascent?
This is a rocket ascent. This is so the fins on this are not wings at all. Like this cannot fly in any plane like manner at all. I mean, if you imagine like the way the shuttle sort of flies in quotes, I can't remember what its glide ratio is, but it's not
falling with style.
This can't. Yeah, this can't do that at all. It is. Yeah, it is very much. It doesn't fly. So this takes off like a rocket, and then it will land. I mean, it re-enters differently to the first stage boosters of the Falcon 9. It does re-enter like the shuttle for a long time, and it will do.
It would have to with humans on board, yeah.
Yeah, so it can do all that, but then sort of at the last kind of minute, it will tilt down and then land engines first on the things.
So these engines are primarily for landing, then, aren't they? Of course, which explains why they're optimized for atmosphere. I was forgetting that ascent is being done by a separate stage.
Yeah, so the ascent is a lot of it's done by the other stage. A bunch of it is done by this stage, and then I think the idea is that it can be refueled in orbit. I don't know whether they need to do that for the lunar mission or not. I don't know if they know that yet either.
Because I imagine they're just going for a fairly basic. I say fairly basic. They're going for sort of free return trajectory. So all of their manoeuvring is going to be done in low orbit.
Yeah. So they're not. Yeah, you're right. They're doing one pass of the moon, as far as I'm aware. They're not like entering into lunar orbit or anything silly like that. It is just one flyby of the moon and then straight back to Earth. I think the total mission is like 4 or 5 days or something.
You'll notice, by the way, that every time I say the word lunar, all my playing of Kerbal Space Programs make it very hard for me not to say Mooner.
Yeah.
I've really been struggling with that.
I have a similar problem.
So when are they going to Minmus?
Minmus never. I think this is, well, the accurate answer is I have no idea. I don't think anyone knows when they're going to do it. Their current estimate, I think, was like 2022 or something, but I don't think that's going to happen.
Again, that's just, we need a number for the papers, isn't it?
Yeah.
Isn't it how I said papers as though that's their main audience? Yes, get this to the tabloids.
So yeah, that's my SpaceX update. It's cool. They are building bits of it. They have got pictures of like prototype hardware from BFS. They've built bits and pieces of it now. So, progress is being made, which is super cool. And they've also showed another. They showed another clip of a test fire for the Raptor engine, which was a really, really long fire. I think Elon was talking over it for like 2 or 3 minutes. So like I think they have got like largely stable combustion from their Raptor engines now, which is really cool. Because it's like, I mean, maybe we can talk about Raptor another time, but suffice to say, it's a technically really interesting engine, and I think they're the first people to manage to get that style of rocket to work.
Well done, SpaceX.
Or the first, maybe, no. People are going to complain to me about saying that. I think they're the first people to get it. If they fly it, they'll be the first to fly it. There was one other engine that's this like full stage combustion that was on a test bench as well. I think they've been more successful than that already. And then if they fly it, they'll be the first to fly that kind of thing.
Like, if we're preempting follow-up, I should point out that when I was talking about dihedral angle, I then gave an example using a paper plane of what would have been anhedral angle. So I do know the difference. It's fine. This is the danger of talking about technical stuff. The more technical you are, the more technical the follow-up.
Well, no more technical talks for now then.